I would like to welcome all of you to this conference to remember, honor, and learn from the events of March 11th, 2011. 3 days from now, early on Friday morning here in the United States, will be the exact 5th anniversary. It was also a Friday in 2011, and it was 2:46 in the afternoon in Japan, as the Pacific plate suddenly lurched up under the Eurasian tectonic plate about 80 miles east of Sendai. It caused a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, the largest ever recorded in Japan. Residents of eastern Japan, all the way down through Tokyo and further, knew something serious had happened, and soon came the warnings of a tsunami, although no one knew how big. Less than an hour later, they learned when the tsunami arrived on the east coast of Honshu. Average height was over 30 feet, and much, much higher in places where the shape of the topography funneled it. It traveled inland as far as 6 miles, flooding over 200 square miles of countryside. The tsunami topped the protective seawall around the Daiichi nuclear power plant. There were 4 reactors there, and the tsunami cut the power lines and drowned the backup generators. Over the next few days, the reactors overheated, explosions breached the wall, radioactivity was released. Meanwhile, aftershocks were rumbling through the region. They went on for at least a year, the largest of them magnitude 7.9. The Japanese residents of that devastated area did the best they could to save themselves and their neighbors. Japan's government, its citizens in other parts of the country, the United States, and the rest of the international community all rushed to help the hundreds of thousands of residents who are still alive, but homeless, injured. And of course, there was a tremendous effort to try to contain the damage in the crippled reactors. So our conference today is to honor the memory of the more than 15,000 Japanese who lost their lives in that tragedy, and to remember that today there are still tens of thousands not back in their homes. We will hear the recollections, the assessments of many Japanese and many Americans who participated in the rescue and recovery operations. And we will try to draw some of the lessons from those events 5 years ago to help us prepare for another earthquake, whether it's on the western rim of that Pacific plate near Japan or on the eastern rim near California in the United States. We will start our conference with some video footage of the disaster itself and of the rescue and recovery efforts. But before we see that video, I would ask you to join me in a moment of silence for those who lost their lives 5 years ago this week. And once again, thank you for attending. And Graham, may we have the video, please?
現場の映像です。広範囲に火災が起こっているのが確認できます。横約 4.5 キロ、縦 1.5 から2キロの範囲で火災が発生しております。現在強い光が発生している、家屋が燃えている場面確認できるかと思います。
家の中でもこれぐらいの線量です。
The U.S. military is working closely with the ambassador, the embassy, USAID, and other U.S. agencies as we work our way through giving our fullest support to the people and the government of Japan. You can tell that the Japanese people are already beginning to dig their way out of this disaster and are well on their way to establishing how they're going to recover and move on in the years to come.
I'm very pleased to be here, to be among so many friends, and to be here at this very important remembrance and recollection. I served in the Marine Corps for 22 years, primarily at posts in the Pacific. As any service member who has served in these positions, you're very aware that humanitarian assistance and disaster response are part of your core missions, and it's something you work with various allies throughout your career. I had served at all levels of the Marine Corps and had been involved in many HADR activities. What was different about Tomodachi and the Tohoku earthquake was not only the scale and scope that Admiral Blair mentioned, but some very unique challenges. By the time I left the Marine Corps, I was working for Morgan Stanley in Tokyo, and I was responsible for corporate security, life safety, and physical security of our 2,000 employees there. When the earthquake happened, we were very prepared for some of the physical things that we needed to do to get our company back operating. We faced considerable challenges, like any people-centric firm, in trying to deal with a very fluid and evolving situation over the next several months. The three areas that I remember were our biggest challenges involved our three panelists here, and I'm very privileged that Sasakawa Peace Foundation has selected these distinguished panelists to open our things. As I mentioned, the areas that I thought were incredible challenges were dealing with health issues, dealing with media reporting, and trying to communicate very complex issues to an international audience. And I believe our panel reflects all of those issues. And I would like to turn this over to Dr. Ramani, who was born and raised in Kobe. He attended Cornell University. He's an emergency physician, and he was one of the many international volunteers to come back and lend his talents and services to the people of Tohoku. Sir.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. It is both my pleasure and honor to speak to you today. Today is a day to remember and reflect on the disaster that occurred 5 years ago. However, for you to understand why I am sitting here before you, I would like to take you back to an earlier date, January 17, 1995, the day of the great Hanshin earthquake that struck my hometown of Kobe, Japan. I was a senior at Cornell visiting my parents in Kobe for winter break. Our apartment building shook at 5:46 a.m. I was thrown off my bed, and we lost heat, water, electricity, and far more. As our home was deemed no longer safe, my parents and I moved about in our car, spent nights at a friend's home, and after a couple days, drove to Osaka in the middle of the night. A trip that usually takes 30 minutes took 11 hours. As I took off from Osaka Airport to return to New York, I felt safe yet regretful. I left my friends and fellow countrymen behind. As a college student at that time, taking care of my parents and myself was barely what I could handle. 16 years later, another disaster struck Japan. For some reason, I couldn't sleep that night. I turned on CNN and saw the infamous footage. Countless people stood by either in shock or crying, watching their friends, family, homes, and lives being washed away. I stared at my TV in tears. I had no doubt in my mind that I wanted to go help. I began by helping set up a donation site on the Japanese Medical Society of America's website. That alone was not enough for me. I responded to the request for medical personnel to go serve in the disastered areas, and after a week, I got the okay. The delay was because physicians without a Japanese license couldn't initially work in Japan, even in the disaster area. I called a few colleagues asking to cover my office, and within a few days, still in the month of March, I was on a plane to Japan. I landed in Tokyo, got on a bus that drove 50 medical volunteers in over 6 hours to Sendai. We were then split into groups, and I was assigned to Minami Sanriku, a coastal town in Miyagi Prefecture. 8 of us drove 2 hours in an ambulance to the Minami Sanriku Bayside Sports Arena, the largest shelter in the region. In all honesty, at that point, I was nervous and scared as the fear of aftershocks, radiation, and destroyed infrastructure was in my mind. The scene was far worse than I had expected, and I was not sure if I had made the right decision to go. Destroyed roads, fallen bridges, crumbled telephone poles, and flattened areas where homes once stood was all I saw. We stayed in the dorm, the teacher's dorm of a preschool. Despite below freezing temperatures, we were also exhausted each night that we passed out once we got to the dorm. We were fortunate to get a warm breakfast at 5 a.m. in a restaurant that was given a generator and served breakfast to all healthcare personnel in the region. They didn't have running water, so I do recall we lined our rice bowls, miso soup bowls, and plates with saran wrap so dishes won't get dirty, and hence they didn't need to be washed. We saw patients soon after sunrise until sunset in a room in the sports arena with a lot of windows, as we had no electricity and light. Of course, there was no heat and running water either. We used porta potties that were mostly overflowing. Most patients we saw were elderly, and other than the new problems of stress, anxiety, fear, insomnia, and depression, they also had lost their regular prescriptions, such as for high blood pressure and diabetes. We only had a supply for approximately 3 days, medication supply for 3 days, and had to request each patient to come back for more in that time span. Other than seeing patients in makeshift clinics at the arena, we took turns going to people's homes, temples, and other smaller shelters to examine and treat people. Our group even helped clean bathrooms at some of these smaller shelters, as poor hygiene was leading to the spread of the Norwalk stomach virus. New volunteer physicians would arrive every day, and a group would leave every day as well. On each of our last day, we all worked a 24-hour shift to cover the main clinic at night for emergencies. We used a small generator to turn on some lamps, as well as flashlights. In my night call duty, I saw multiple patients with vomiting, diarrhea, and fever, once again probably due to the Norwalk stomach virus. Then my time came to leave. At this time, I did not want to leave. However, with a few doctors already developing stress disorders after what they saw, we were not recommended to remain for a long, continuous period. I was driven to Tokyo, flew to Kobe for a day, to show my parents that I was fine. Upon my return to New York, I reflected on what I saw. By far, the most common issues were once again the mental disorders. With the help of the Japanese Medical Society of America, we were able to get in touch with doctors in the area and supported the setup of a mental health clinic called Healing the Heart. The first clinics opened in Fukushima and Iwate prefectures. We also began a program where we invited medical residents to New York who worked in the hospitals in the devastated areas of Tohoku. 48 medical residents have already come to the U.S. through this semi-annual program. I've been fortunate to be the chair to run this program. With the support of many of you and the guidance of medical experts, we were able to help by providing more than just a check to the people in northeastern Japan. I know many of you have supported Japan in your own ways as well, and thank you. And lastly, to the people of Japan, we have not forgotten about you. We are here to help. Today, tomorrow, and in the future. God bless you. そして最後に日本の皆さん、私たちはあなた方のことを決して忘れてません。今日も明日
We will never forget you today, tomorrow, and future. We are always here to help you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. I would like to, Ms. Sekiguchi was a reporter for Fukushima television and recorded from throughout the disaster. Ma'am?
First of all, thank you this wonderful opportunity. I would like to share my experience to each of you. So as Jim told, I used to be newscaster of Fukushima Television, Fukushima Prefecture for 13 years, including 2011. Since I was planning to go to Tokyo to see my parents and friends from March 11th to 13th, I was packing my suitcase. But I was rushing to my office once I felt a huge earthquake. Was thinking about how to report this huge earthquake and tsunami while I was rushing to my office. As for day one, I reported huge tsunami and earthquake, but could not report the detail of the current situation of Fukushima. Under the panic, all we could do was to broadcast live report of tsunami, which captured by our fixed point cameras. One of them camera, so-called nuclear power plant camera. All TV stations which located in Fukushima set the fixed camera just in case in order to monitor Fukushima nuclear power plant site through the year. So that the camera showed us that there was no ocean which should be there. For a while, I was wondering what was that. But after 5 minutes or 10 minutes or so, that camera showed us huge tsunami hit the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant site. So we had been considering seriously about the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant station situation since then. This was but the beginning of the tragedy of Fukushima. On March 16th, I received an email from a friend who is also other company's newscaster in Fukushima. She asked me if I was planning to evacuate from Fukushima to Tokyo, my hometown. I never thought about evacuation, but her email shows that some of friends or even reporter evacuated from Fukushima. So I found myself to live in Fukushima under a serious situation. So I called my parents first time since March 11 and discussed if I had to evacuate or not. My parents told me that and then promised me that they could help whenever I faced difficulty to evacuate. So they encouraged me to maintain to report for Fukushima and Japan. So thanks to my parents, I never felt fear from Fukushima nuclear accident. So since then, I focused to report the current situation of Fukushima's living people. But it was hard for me to report situation of Fukushima because it was depressing for all Fukushima students due to nuclear power station situation and continuous tragedies. Fukushima's main industry was agriculture, but all farmers could not sell vegetables, rice, cows too. So cows had been fed on rice straw containing a high level of the radioactive isotope. So they had to kill their cows with tears. Unfortunately, some farmers kill themselves on the land they struggle to maintain since Fukushima nuclear accident. In addition, situation of Fukushima was depressing for some evacuees. Some evacuees had to give up to find their missing families after tsunami due to evacuation order. So if Fukushima nuclear accident did not occur, they might save their family's life, or at least they might find their missing family's bodies earlier. So I would like to emphasize 3 parts to each of you through my experience. So first, the importance of daily preparation. You should store adequate water, food, at least for a week, and make your family plan. This might including escape routes and family communications. Second is the importance of knowledge of in your area. If severe accident happen like Fukushima, do you know how to evacuate? Where is your shelter? Please ask local officials those questions. In addition to finding out about your community's plan, it is important that you know what the plans are in place for your workplace and your children's school. Last is the importance of mental care. As I told, all people had to face depressing situation, so we needed mental care in order to release stress or fear. 私も最後に日本語でメッセージを。
Lastly, I would like to give the message in Japanese. There are the people who stay in Fukushima to do their best, including my friends, my company colleagues, and those who have helped me for my reporting. So from DC, far away from Fukushima, I have been giving my cheer-up call every time. So everybody supports people in Fukushima. With this message, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sekiguchi. Our panel will conclude with Ms. Sayaka Gammon. She was a JET student also in Fukushima and taught at many schools throughout the countryside in Fukushima Prefecture. Sayaka?
Thank you. First, I did want to say thank you to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for inviting me here today. It's a great honor to be able to share my experiences and how I saw the situation in Fukushima. To give a little context of who I was at that time, I was 23 years old and had just arrived in Japan in about 7 months prior to the event. Although I am half Japanese, I did not grow up speaking Japanese, and so at the time of the event, my communication skills were not good. I think the JET program may have since changed their policy, but when I started in 2010, people weren't required to speak Japanese, and that was to create an environment where students were forced to speak English to be able to communicate with me. And while that was a great thing to have for many reasons, and for especially me trying to learn Japanese at that time, it certainly created a lot of impact on how the English teaching community was able to react to the event. There were roughly 150 JET participants in Fukushima Prefecture. In my city, there's about 10 to 15. And in my city, there's about 10 of us were very close, and we really stuck together at that time and had to make a lot of decisions together, and there's so many aftershocks, and it was such a crazy time that we all kind of congregated in my apartment in the evenings and would really try to help each other make decisions based off of the limited information that everyone had. But you know, out of this group of 10 people, none of us were fluent in Japanese, and we were getting almost all of our information from foreign media and checking out, constantly updating websites from foreign news, and anything we could try and understand from our Japanese coworkers who were trying to explain to us the situation. So I definitely think that added another layer of fear and confusion to an already difficult situation. So as the news developed in the first week after the earthquake, everyone in Fukushima had to make a big decision about whether you wanted to stay. And I think Ms. Sekiguchi can understand is that real desire to try and stay if you can. And I was trying to make decisions and try and remain calm and make rational decisions about what to do. And I didn't want to leave Fukushima until there was a mandatory evacuation. And my parents in the United States, they also remained very calm. And they accepted that this was a decision that I needed to make on my own. It was a very personal decision to me, and I definitely had a different feeling towards Fukushima than they could understand. I found out later, actually, that although it appeared that they were remaining calm, they actually, I received a lot of pressure to leave the country myself, but my family also received a lot of pressure, from friends and extended family and people saying, we should try and get her out of there. And so I think people, there was a lot of pressures on different people at that time. I had a friend who, a foreigner, she received a phone call from her mother, and her mother was very distraught and crying on the phone and said, I bought you a plane ticket. You need to be in Tokyo tomorrow morning. And she called me, and she was so upset because she wasn't ready to leave. And that decision was kind of made for her at that time. And so that happened to actually two of my friends. And so while I tried to remain calm at that time, when the United States State Department put out extended the evacuation zone for US residents to 80 kilometers, my apartment was within that. And so I made the decision to leave to Saitama, where I had my mother's sister and mother lived there, so my aunt and grandmother, and I decided to go there. After about, actually when I arrived in Saitama, I just remember completely losing it on the platform at the Shinkansen station, and it was really a culmination of everything finally hitting me and finally feeling a great sense of relief to not be so worried about all these uncertainties, and then also a great sense of guilt for having left when many other people couldn't. And so that was definitely an emotion that a lot of people who had to leave felt at the time. And I was very lucky to be able to be with my aunt and grandma at that time. But I found out that of the 150 Fukushima jets, in my understanding, I only can remember one person who didn't return to Fukushima a few months, at least a month to a few months after it all happened. When I returned from Saitama about a week later, I found that a lot of my friends had already started mobilizing a relief effort, and we started visiting evacuation centers and playing with the children and serving hot food, and we drove out to the coast and started helping some friends on the coast and cleaning houses. And in fact, I had a friend who, when he left the country, it was a hard decision for him to leave, and when he left in his home country, raised thousands of dollars for the relief effort by speaking at events and sharing about what happened. And when he returned to his job, he was able to donate all that money and then became a leader in mobilizing the jet community to start volunteering more and donating more to the cause. So I believe one of my biggest takeaways is that everybody made very personal decisions and very difficult decisions at that time. Everyone was under a lot of different pressures, and there was so much uncertainty and confusion. So what I do know, and what I would speak to about what I saw in Fukushima, was that many people really came together at this time and showed me a very different side of what such a tragedy can produce. And I certainly know for everyone on the panel here and many of the people here today that the events did change us in a lot of ways. So I was very honored to be able to come here today and talk. This is my first time in 5 years that I'm not in Japan for the anniversary, so it was very important for me to be here and remember today with everyone. So thank you very much.
Before I open to the audience for questions, I would like to ask our panelists to comment on one thing. This was one of the first disasters, I would say, that we were responding to or trying to deal with in an age of social media. and obviously it affected how everyone communicated. We were in truly a wired global society, and for most of the American servicemen and women who've responded to other disasters, it is not always the case. Could I ask each of our panelists to briefly describe how social media either affected your decisions or affected the conduct of your reporting? But Sayaka-san, could we start with you, please?
Wow, it was a huge deal at the time. I had a very good friend who lived on the coast. We did know that his apartment was very near the water, and so and he was a jet as well. Nobody could get in contact with him for days, and I think maybe he reached out to the jet, the people who were accounting for jets. I think he reached out to them, but nobody heard from him. We didn't know which evacuation center he was in, what was going on. And then one day he just posted on social media, posted on Facebook, I can't remember exactly what he wrote, but it was some very uplifting, like, wow, so I'm tired, and it was just a moment where we all were like, oh, like, he doesn't have a lot to say right now, but it was such a relief that he could just post that little thing, and we all immediately knew that he was okay, so.
Thank you.
じゃあ日本語に変えます。
私は要はテレビ
I was working for TV. I was anchor, and I myself didn't use social media. However, from the government and from Fukushima prefecture, we couldn't get enough information on what kind of situation. Even if I was in a TV station inside, I couldn't get it. So social media or mail, these are very important. I remember that because information doesn't come to me. Ordinary people, where are they located? Where are they looking for? And where is the water? Where is some food you can buy? Ordinary people were asking by fax and email every day. More than 1,000 information arrived to TV station. And for 30 minutes, I was reading every day, one after the other. That was the accurate information we could provide.
Well, when I went there, we didn't have very good cell phone reception. However, I do recall at the Bayside Arena, because it was the largest shelter in Miyagi Prefecture, there were one or two people assigned to have Twitter feeds, which they were sending out messages to people in the area that please kindly follow this feed. And they used to release health information about simple things like, if you have a diabetes and you're taking this medication, a stock has come in today, please come to the Bayside Arena. If you have, if any of you had broken a bone the first couple days and had it taped up, there is a X-ray facility now, so please come in. And I do recall that we were handing out flyers as we went out to see patients that please follow this Twitter feed. I personally was using Facebook to post. We didn't have reception there, but we had reception at our dorm. So once a day I would put up one or two pictures and just tell my friends and family here and elsewhere that I was fine.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to open up the questions to the audience, please. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for the organizers. I'm Paige Cottingham Streeter, and I am the Executive Director of the Japan U.S. Friendship Commission. At the time of the events, I was responsible for the Mike Mansfield Fellowships, and there were a number of Mansfield Fellows who were in Japan. And I know in working with them to try to find them, they were concerned about wanting to stay versus whether they should go. And I get the sense from each of the panelists that some of you were drawn to be there because you felt that you should be. Those of you who were there felt that that's where you needed to be, but there were other forces telling you should leave. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more specifically to that tension. My understanding is that particularly the fellows, they were in Tokyo, but they were feeling the aftershocks, and there was a lot of uncertainty with respect to the information about the safety of the nuclear situation. But at the same time, they were there as a part of an exchange and wanted to show support to their Japanese counterparts in the government. They ended up staying, just to let you know, but it was a very difficult decision, and thanks to the embassy for giving them the information that they needed to make that possible.
Sure. To be able to speak to that same feeling, something that frustrated me following the disaster was there was, of course, a very much needed focus on the Fukushima Daiichi power plant and understanding what's going on. And that, of course, in Fukushima was a very important thing to remember. But something that was frustrating was that I felt that the tsunami was getting kind of pushed aside in importance, and for anybody who went to the coast and saw that, and there's definitely a need to remain, and there's this feeling of, there's more that we can all do. I'm able-bodied, there's certainly something that can happen, and there was an overwhelming feeling of guilt that you had to think about when you're making that decision, and we still don't know exactly what the right decision was at that time, and so there are many people who left and stayed who still disagree and will continue to disagree for decades, I think. But I certainly can relate to that feeling of the pressure.
I'd like to add one thing. I didn't know how international a company I worked for until the accident happened. And we had a workforce that was not only Japanese and American, but also many Europeans, many people from Korea, China, and many other countries. And one of the biggest challenges we faced was everyone was receiving, quote, official information from their embassy, and that often conflicted with one another, with the other views of the government or even the American embassy. I would also say that many of my European colleagues had experienced Chernobyl earlier in their lives, and they had a different perspective on the threat and the seriousness of Fukushima than people who were not from Europe. So I think we're going to debate this, for many years to come. It was an incredibly challenging situation when you're dealing with such an international community, not only among the people living and working in Japan, but also the people responding to that.
When I had gone, obviously there were a lot of aftershocks, but being that I grew up in Japan, I was well trained in our school. We had a lot of drills growing up, so I wasn't too worried about the aftershocks. The biggest concern was obviously the radiation. And although I was in Miyagi Prefecture, this was 1 week after the meltdown, and about 1 week to 10 days after the meltdown, so we really didn't have that much information. Once I got there, we weren't getting any information. But the saving grace for me, at least, was at the Bayside arena, sports arena, in the huge parking lot, the Israeli military physicians group actually had come in and set up a clinic there. And their clinic, I must say, I was very impressed. They ended up donating their facility to Shizugawa Byoin, which is the hospital that crumbled during the tsunami in Minami Sanriku. So that facility, they set up these prefabricated clinics. One was a X-ray facility, one was a portable mobile ICU unit, and they actually had a mobile radiation room where I used to go every day to just get screened if there was any radiation. They should check the bottom of my feet, they should check my thyroid, and they had a military physician expert on radiation there. And I think that, to me, as well as the other members who flew in to volunteer, was definitely helpful. And we got firsthand experience from an expert that we were all safe in terms of radiation in the region.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Susan Morita. I'm on the board of the U.S. Japan Council. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about the delivery of mental health services during this time. I think the need for medical doctors who, treat physical ailments and so forth, that's very obvious. I would be interested, though, in the special challenges there might be in delivering mental health services. One, given the general stigma, perhaps that's overcome just by the acuteness of the need. But also, you've got physicians from around the world coming, and I would expect delivering mental health services is a much more challenging task with linguistic issues, language differences and cultural differences and so forth. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
In terms of the volunteering physicians, 99% were Japanese-speaking physicians. When I was there, the span of 10 days I was there, I think I was the only non-Japanese physician there. But I spoke fluent Japanese, so language wasn't an issue. In the first 10 days, in all honesty, we had our hands tied. We really couldn't sit and provide behavioral therapy. It was more, if you have anxiety, take this pill. If you have insomnia, take this pill. If you have depression, start on this pill. And but I came back after myself. A couple of other doctors from the U.S. Went there, and all of them who came back, all of us decided the biggest problem there is mental health. It's not radiation, it's not broken bones, it's mental health. So we started working with the doctors there, and as I mentioned, the first clinic that was set up was this clinic called Nagomi in Fukushima, in Soma city, and it was a clinic that was built from bottom up, and it was basically a mental health clinic with psychiatrists, and the psychiatrists came from all over Japan. So volunteer physicians everywhere. I met a physician. I went back every 6 months the first couple of years, then I have still been back every year. But there were volunteer physicians from everywhere, from Okinawa, Kobe, Hokkaido, weekends, take a week off, they would come and volunteer time. And a couple of doctors who were there set up a schedule, and they would ask the volunteers that, well, in June we have 2 weeks where we have no one, can you come in then? And so on. And they filled up a schedule where they had psychiatrists from all over the nation come in and volunteer. I think the foreign physicians, we were allowed just, I think, 3 months right after the quake to practice there with a foreign medical license. But after that, again, that temporary lift on the requirement was put in place, so I couldn't practice there. But they had a very good schedule, and Tohoku in general, with the economy being sluggish before the quake, there were a lot of mental issues. Suicide rates were high. This is even before the quake. So the quake was just more of a wake-up, a sign that we really need to be aggressive. And that's why from the U.S. we helped. We donated money to set up the clinic, but the actual physicians were all from within Japan. And till today, the clinic is running, and they have physicians, I would say 90% are volunteers. They come on their own time, they come on their own dime, fly in, see patients for a couple days to a couple weeks, and fly back to their hometowns.
Yes, sir.
Lynn Wells, question, you mentioned the Eastern European different attitude based on Chernobyl. How did that skew their view of what happened at 3/11?
So this is largely anecdotal, is that we definitely saw many of the Europeans leave earlier than prior to the announced evacuations or the announced departures by the U.S. government, the voluntary departure. We also saw some of the foreign schools, the French school and the German school, remained closed for much longer than some of the American schools. I could not give you exact statistics on that, but just it was certainly a factor in watching some of the German companies relocate down south, or some of the European expatriates leave leave before the voluntary departure was announced. Sir. Yes, sir.
Chuck Huntington, East Winds. I just wanted to share the International Medical Corps that was there, brought in a lot of medical supplies, but they formed a hotline for English speakers. There were many Americans, English, and other foreigners who wanted to talk mental health issues. So here's an international NGO, the Medical Corps, answering a lot of their questions, which we never thought that that would be a good role for an NGO, but it was ideal for those first 3 months.
Thank you, sir.
You know, when I was there, the international group, I believe it's the, it's originated in France. Doctors Without Borders were there as well. But again, the biggest issue was, at least I was at Minami Sanriku, 99% of the patients were Japanese. And the biggest issue was the language barrier. So Doctors Without Borders, they came for a while, but they couldn't see patients, they went back. The Jewish physicians, they had an amazing clinic, but again, language was the issue. So they were there, and I believe the government assigned 2 or 3 Japanese doctors to translate for them. So it just didn't make sense. There's a Japanese physician there who's working as a translator. He himself could have seen the patients as well. But the facility was definitely very helpful. They brought in an orthopedic, an intensivist, and so on. And the emergencies, I myself took patients there and I asked them, this patient needs an x-ray, or this patient is on blood thinners. They had a lab set up where they could do blood draws right there. So we had blood testing done there, everything. So they were very helpful, but again, our biggest issue was, at least where I was, majority of the patients are Japanese. In Tohoku, unfortunately, no one speaks English. So the language barrier was the biggest issue. And when I did initially volunteer, I joined a group called Tokushukai, and the Tokushukai's president's daughter happened to be a medical resident in the U.S. And she sent out an email, if anyone wants to volunteer, feel free. But she did clearly say we would highly, highly recommend that you at least have the Japanese, you be proficient in Japanese.
Jim, could you talk a little bit more about the scene in Tokyo? You feel physically threatened because you're only short distance from the radiation, and yet Tokyo, of course, as the capital, has got to be the place that's trying to organize relief efforts and so on. So this tug and this haul of doing your job in terms of helping the organizations, both Japanese and international, help the affected area, but yet physical danger to the people there. From the distance, we would see television shots of empty streets in Tokyo during rush hour, or sometimes we'd see people sort of defiantly trying to carry on their lives as usual and so on. And that sort of the emotional and the intellectual sides of it in Tokyo must have swept back and forth across it many times. And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, sir. As I mentioned at the outset, we're very quick to do the physical repairs for our building to allow us to operate. And like most foreign financial firms, we're a people business. And so we needed to try to get so many of our people into work each day. And it was a challenge, as the Admiral said, not only because of the pull, because we did have many family members with people up in Tohoku, people who actually came from the United States and wanted to go help immediately. But I think one of the biggest challenges was something that was much more pragmatic, is that people who remember Tokyo will remember, at that time, will remember the rolling blackouts. And the rolling blackouts would be announced each morning. And it was, if you are a parent, if you are a caregiver of an elderly person, one of the challenges you face is my district, is my town going to be as part of this rolling blackout? And then what do I do for either daycare, or what is going to happen in terms of being able to come home at the beginning of the day, or at the end of the day? So I think we faced a lot of challenges. We did, as a company, we tried to address some of the mental health issues. We also tried to address what I think was one of the biggest challenges, was communicating very, very challenging health information to people who are not technical people. And I will share a story I shared with General Burt last night. You know, for most people, when you're talking about nuclear issues and you start hearing, you know, millisieverts and all this, it goes over your head. And at some point, I think it was in late March, the Far East Network, every day would broadcast. About 3 o'clock, they would say, you know, today's radiation in Tokyo is equivalent to the same amount of radiation you're going to get in Lincoln, Nebraska, or San Jose, California. And that was one of the biggest things that helped people understand that the situation was not as catastrophic as you were seeing on CNN, and it took a very technical health issue and brought it down to a level that we could understand. And I would just tell all my colleagues, I said, you know, listen to FEN. You know, that's a great source of information. So. Sure. Sure.
I have a question for Sekiguchi-san. At the time, it seems that everybody was desperate for more information and to try to find out what situations were in the towns that were cut off from major cities. I'm just wondering, was there any communication between the government and media to try to get your folks, your cameras into rural areas to see what the situation was during that time?
福島県のテレビ局は福島県庁が当時メディアとの会見の場所になっていまして、でそこで記者は待機をして情報をもらうということになっていたんですけれども、東京電力も同じです。原発のシチュエーションがどうなっているのかっていうのをそこから情報をもらうっていうことになっていたんですけれども、実はごめんなさい、東京でどういうふうに報道されているのかは私は福島県のテレビ局に勤めているのでわからないんですが、少なくとも福島県のテレビ局では初めのうち東京電力のシチュエーションがどういう状況なのかっていうのを東京の政府であるとか東京電力の本社ほど情報がもらえませんでした。なんでかっていうと、東京がまず初めに会見をします。それからじゃないと福島県では会見できませんっていう答えが初めのうちは返ってきたので、私たちはなかなか情報を取るのが大変でした。ただ話の中で少し説明した通り、福島の原発を監視するカメラを福島県のテレビ局は設置していたので、そこをリアルタイムで津波の状況を伝えるですとか、そういった情報はありましたけれども、いち早く本当は伝えなくてはいけない福島県だった。
To the audience, what the situation it was at the power plant. However, we were not sure whether such reporting was done very quickly.
My name is Yamaguchi. I was at the Prime Minister's office 1 week after the tsunami hit. And even in the Prime Minister's office, people are so anxious about the information. And my personal experience is the 7 days after the earthquake means the exact time when the people needs to find, people may find what is needed, what is medicine or food or water or some other things, where and how much. That was a really important question. But to me, my first source of real-time information was NGO. One of the NGO hired 10 trucks, and they, without knowing where and who and what they drove trucks to the affected area and unloaded whatever they got. And on the way back, after driving 2 hours, drivers come to the place where they can call Tokyo by their cellular phone. And by the time when arriving in Tokyo, headquarters knew what is exactly needed, then ready to go to the place again. So I have kept calling, I kept calling those guys, what is needed, where, and how many people are there, is hospital okay? It was a real good information. Those information should be linked. And actually, some people made a link of those information, public TV or radio or announcement of the government. And I remember I learned from the TV news, but some of the just ordinary men set up the sort of bulletin board in the center of the affected area, and who are looking for food or what kinds of goods are there, and there is an excessive amount of blankets and waters, those kinds of things. That is the kind of reality of the information flow in such a kind of such a chaotic station. So those chaotic stations still works for particular reasons, so certain reasons. If we are smart enough to make a broader link of those information, we could have done a much better job.
Sir, I apologize for not calling you General Field. I apologize for not calling you General Field. But, yeah, that's right. I think we have one more. Yes, sir.
My name is Yuki Sekiguchi, Defense Attaché and Naval Attaché Embassy of Japan. And the first, thank you very much for all the support for the Operation Tomodachi and the great earthquake disaster to help from a friend from the U.S. And my question is for Dr. Ramani. And I did appreciate your support for the time we needed. But my question is more like a specific one. Like, did you face any challenge or difficulty with as a medical practitioners, doctor who work in different country like Japan? Because I was there in operation room during the Operation Tomodachi. I faced a couple of times with the bureaucratic procedure. The foreign countries, the people that working there in Japan, they sometimes conflict with the license issues, like the regulation, domestic regulation. Did you face any challenge with that?
I actually was very fortunate. By the time I went, I think it was March 25th where they allowed, there was a list of countries. If you are licensed in that country, you can practice in Tohoku for, I think it was 3 months. And so I didn't have a license issue. Before I went, they asked for just a copy of my license. That was it. I sent that in. Plus, I was one of the board members of the Japanese Medical Society of America, so that made it a little easier for myself. When I went there, we were given paper charts and told to write everything down. Being that I didn't have a language problem, I wrote, there's some words I didn't know the medical term in Japanese. I wrote it in English. They told me that was fine. So my charts were half in Japanese, half in English. So I didn't have that issue. My biggest problem was, I had to dispense medication, but I didn't know the names of a lot of drugs in Japanese. Unfortunately, drug names in Japan especially, a lot of them are still all branded. And when they're branded, they change the name of the drug. So I wanted to give a medication. I would go ask the pharmacy. There was a pharmacy set up there where we would actually go and take the drug and give it to the patient physically. But when I would go there, I would ask for a drug, and I didn't understand the name. They didn't know what I was saying. And I had to explain, I want this group of drug. Do you have anything in the group? So that delayed a lot of things. I wish that was streamlined a little bit better. But other than that, by the time I got there March 30th, the lab was set up, X-ray was set up, there was an ICU there. We had a decent pharmacy there. Took a little time, but medications were coming in every day. We were in the biggest shelter there, so the self-defense force, I saw helicopters coming down every day with supplies, which included medical supplies from all over the country. I was actually involved with a group called AmeriCares, which donated a lot of supplies from the U.S., 1 or 2 planes full of cargo of medical supplies that went to Tohoku University in Sendai, and from there in these large trucks, they were distributed all over Miyagi Prefecture. So I didn't really face, as a physician, oh, we don't have these supplies, we didn't have this medication. It's 2 weeks later, it was good enough. Medications are in short supply. We had so many patients, that's why it was 3 days supply. By the time I was leaving, they were able to give 1 week supply of medications to patients. So it's becoming easier and easier as the time went.
Thank you very much. I think we have an outstanding panel to kick off the day, and I look forward to hearing everyone else. Thank you very much.